Everything was fine until Karen electrocuted the pool just to keep the neighborhood kids out. Now she's facing attempted murder charges. Eleanor Winters stood at her living room window, manicured fingernails tapping against the glass as she watched the neighborhood children splash in the Sycamore Heights community pool. Her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrow behind designer sunglasses. The pool wasn't meant for those children, the ones from the recently built apartments at the edge of the subdivision, the ones whose parents hadn't paid the premium for waterfront properties like hers. Absolute chaos, she muttered, wincing as a high-pitched squeal pierced through her double-pane windows. No respect for property values or peace and quiet. At 57, Eleanor had spent 15 years as the president of the Sycamore Heights Homeowners Association, a position she wielded like a scepter. Her home directly overlooked the kidney-shaped pool that had become the center of her mounting obsession. The home she paid $875,000 for, the home that was supposed to guarantee her tranquility and exclusivity. She reached for her phone and snapped several photos of the children playing. Evidence for the upcoming HOA meeting. Evidence of rule violations she meticulously documented. Pool usage outside designated hours. Guests without proper passes. Towels left on chairs. Though she'd never admit it, Eleanor's crusade had intensified after the town council had approved the new mixed-income housing development adjacent to their pristine community. Something must be done, she whispered to herself. Across the neighborhood, Maria Delgado was finishing her shift at Memorial Hospital. As a single mother and nurse working 12-hour shifts, she treasured the community amenities that came with her new apartment. The pool access had been the deciding factor when she chosen Sycamore Heights residences for herself and her 10-year-old son Diego. "I promise I'll take you swimming tomorrow," she told Diego as she tucked him in that night, smoothing his dark hair from his forehead. "Double shifts over, and I have the whole weekend off." Diego's eyes lit up. "Can Jaden and Marcus come too?" Maria smiled. "Of course. Their moms need a break too." She hadn't noticed how the blonde woman in the colonial-style house had been watching them last weekend, documenting their every move. She didn't know that Eleanor Winters had already filed 3 formal complaints about apartment residents abusing pool privileges, and had been overruled by the property management company each time. Meanwhile, Eleanor sat at her dining room table surrounded by aHOA bylaws, neighborhood covenants, and printouts of local ordinances. Her husband Thomas had long since gone to bed, used to her late-night crusades against perceived neighborhood infractions. Her latest complaint had been dismissed just that morning. The property management company's email was still open on her laptop. Mrs. Winters, as we've previously explained, a pool access agreement with Sycamore Heights residences is legally binding. All residents have equal access rights during posted hours. Please direct any future concerns about specific rule violations to security personnel rather than targeting specific resident groups. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her glass of Chardonnay. 15 years of building this community, protecting its standards, governing its aesthetics, and now they were letting just anyone in. Her sanctuary was being invaded. Her authority challenged. Her eyes drifted to her husband's toolbox in the corner of the dining room. Thomas had been rewiring the backyard lighting system earlier that day. The electrical equipment still lay scattered across the workbench. A dangerous idea began to form in Eleanor's mind. If the management company wouldn't enforce proper restrictions, perhaps she needed to take matters into her own hands. Just enough to scare them away. Just enough to protect what was hers. She opened her laptop and began searching. First casually, then with increasing focus. Pool electrical safety, water conductivity, low-voltage electrical deterrent systems. What began as idle revenge fantasy was crystallizing into something much darker, something that would change lives forever, including her own. Eleanor smiled thinly as she closed her laptop. In the morning, she would make a trip to the hardware store. The hardware store clerk eyed Eleanor's purchases with mild curiosity. Insulated wire, electrical tape, a voltage meter, waterproof junction boxes, and a small transformer. "Big project this weekend?" he asked, scanning the items. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just some landscape lighting upgrades. The HOA has standards to maintain." She paid in cash, a decision she'd made deliberately that morning, and loaded the supplies into her Mercedes SUV. The plan had evolved overnight from vague notion to concrete steps. She wasn't an electrician, but Thomas' hobby had exposed her to enough basics. Eleanor understood the fundamental principle. Water conducts electricity. Just enough voltage to create discomfort, not enough to cause permanent harm. A deterrent, a message. This is for the community's good, she assured herself as she drove home. Property values, safety concerns, unauthorized usage, she repeated these justifications like a mantra, drowning out the voice of reason that whispered this had crossed from enforcement to vengeance. Back home, Eleanor checked her watch. Thomas would be at his golf game until late afternoon. She had hours to work uninterrupted. In the garage, she surveyed Thomas's electrical tools and carefully selected what she needed. The community pool's pump house key hung on their key rack, another privilege of her HOA position. The May sunshine beat down as Eleanor, dressed in gardening clothes and a wide-brimmed hat, casually made her way to the pool area with a tote bag of gardening supplies, the planters she maintained around the deck. Several residents nodded politely as she passed. Her authority in Sycamore Heights was unquestioned. At the pump house, Eleanor quickly let herself in, heart pounding. The chemical smell of chlorine filled the small concrete building. She'd studied the pool's electrical system through maintenance reports and quickly located what she needed: access to the underwater lighting circuit. With methodical precision, she installed her modification: a separate transformer that would introduce a low-level current into the water, controlled by a remote switch she could activate from her house. Just enough to create discomfort, she murmured as she worked, just enough to send a message. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she completed the final connections, but her resolve remained firm. She tidied the pump house meticulously, leaving no trace of her alterations, then locked up and continued her gardening charade for another 30 minutes before returning home. That evening at dinner, Thomas commented on her unusual cheerfulness. "You seem in better spirits. I take it the pool situation has resolved itself." Eleanor sliced her chicken breast with precise movements. "Let's just say I've implemented a solution that should restore proper order." Thomas raised an eyebrow but didn't inquire further. 27 years of marriage had taught him when to probe and when to grant his wife her privacy, especially regarding HOA matters. Across the community, Maria Delgado was preparing pool bags for tomorrow's promised outing. Towels, sunscreen, snacks, and Diego's new goggles were carefully packed. She'd invited her coworker Samantha and her twins Jaden and Marcus to join them. "Mom, can we go early?" "Before it gets super crowded?" Diego asked, bouncing on his toes with excitement. Maria smiled, ruffling his hair. "That's the plan, Mio. We'll have the place almost to ourselves if we go right when it opens." Diego's enthusiasm was infectious and Maria felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The last few months had been challenging: the move after her divorce, the adjustment to a new school for Diego, the increased responsibilities at work. This community had slowly begun to feel like home, despite the occasional cold shoulder from some of the homeowners. What she didn't know was that Eleanor Winters had been watching her building that evening through binoculars, noting the pool preparations, calculating. Eleanor had overheard Maria's conversation with Samantha at the mailboxes yesterday, had marked the planned pool visit in her notebook. As darkness fell over Sycamore Heights, Eleanor sat in her home office, the remote control device on her desk beside a glass of wine. She tested it once, briefly, watching from her window as the pool lights flickered almost imperceptibly. Satisfaction curled in her chest like smoke. A text notification lit up her phone, the neighborhood watch group chat she'd established years ago. Asterisk, new residents from the apartments spotted loitering near the pool after hours. Everyone please remain vigilant about our community assets, asterisk. Responses flooded in with gratitude for her vigilance, reinforcing her self-perception as community guardian. Eleanor sent the security guard, whom she personally selected and whose contract she reviewed annually, to investigate. Another mark in her documentation. Eleanor watched through her binoculars as Maria swiped her access card at the pool gate. The system beeped green. Policy change Eleanor had fought bitterly against when the management company had granted apartment residents equal access privileges. Diego raced ahead to claim a spot on the pristine deck while Samantha's twins, Jaden and Marcus, followed close behind. The adults set down their bags, spreading towels across lounge chairs, all perfectly normal, all in Eleanor's eyes a violation of the natural order. Her thumb caressed the remote control's button, anticipation building. She wouldn't activate it immediately. She would wait until they were all in the water, until retreat wouldn't be simple. Maximum impact, maximum message. 20 minutes passed. The children had completed their mandatory shower and were now standing at the pool's edge preparing to jump in. Maria and Samantha had settled into nearby chairs, chatting easily while keeping watchful eyes on their children. 1, 2, 3. Diego counted down, and the three boys leaped into the crystal-clear water with synchronized splashes. Eleanor smiled thinly and pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Diego's face contorted. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but instead released a strangled cry. His small body went rigid, arms flailing as the electrical current surged through the water. "Mom," he managed to gasp before slipping beneath the surface. Maria was on her feet instantly, maternal instinct overwhelming rational thought. She dove toward the pool edge as Samantha screamed, rushing toward her own children, who were now also showing signs of distress, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. From her perch, Eleanor watched in horrified fascination. This wasn't supposed to happen. The current was meant to be uncomfortable, not dangerous, just enough to create a negative association to keep them away. She calculated the voltage carefully, or so she thought. Maria reached the pool's edge, extending her arm toward Diego. The moment her fingertips touched the water, her body convulsed violently. She collapsed half and half out of the pool, muscles seizing as the current found a new path. Across the courtyard, retired electrician Walter Grimes had been walking his dog when he heard the screams. Taking in the scene instantly, he sprinted toward the pump house, recognizing the signs of electrical current and water from decades of experience. In her living room, Eleanor stood frozen, remote control clutched in a white-knuckled grip. This wasn't right. This wasn't the plan. She frantically pressed the button again, but nothing changed. The modifications she'd made had created a situation she could no longer control. Walter burst into the pump house and immediately located the main circuit breaker, slamming it down with practiced efficiency. The pool lights went dark, the pump fell silent, and most importantly, the electrical current stopped flowing through the water. Back at the pool, chaos reigned. Samantha had somehow managed to use a plastic chair to pull Jaden from the water without touching it herself. Marcus had made it to the opposite side where another resident, drawn by the commotion, had helped him out. But Diego and Maria remained motionless, the boy floating face down, his mother slumped half-submerged at the pool's edge. "Call 911. Walter shouted as he raced from the pump house. "Don't touch the water." Eleanor watched the unfolding disaster through her binoculars, her hands shaking uncontrollably now. This wasn't supposed to happen. No one was supposed to get hurt. Not really hurt. Just scared. Just deterred. Thomas came up behind her, startling her so badly she dropped the remote control. It clattered against the hardwood floor, the back popping open, batteries rolling under the sofa. "What's all that commotion?" he asked, then noticed her expression. "Eleanor? What's wrong?" She couldn't speak, couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene at the pool. Thomas followed her gaze out the window, taking in the gathering crowd, the arrival of first responders, the frantic CPR being performed on both Diego and Maria. "My God," he whispered. Then his eyes fell to the scattered components of the remote control, the binoculars, the electrical manual open on the desk. "Eleanor, what have you done?" Her voice, when it finally came, was small and distant. "They weren't supposed to be in our pool. They don't belong here." Thomas backed away from her, horror dawning on his face. "I'm calling the police." "They're already here," Eleanor replied mechanically, gesturing toward the 3 police cruisers now pulling into the community entrance, lights flashing. Her hands dropped limply to her sides as the magnitude of what she'd done began to sink in. The sterile fluorescence of the hospital waiting room cast harsh shadows across Samantha's exhausted face. 48 hours had passed since the incident, and she hadn't left the hospital except to check on her own children, who were staying with their grandmother. Her hands cradled a cold cup of vending machine coffee as she waited for the latest update on Diego and Maria. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about Diego. Despite being submerged for nearly 2 minutes, the rapid emergency response had prevented the worst outcomes. He remained in the pediatric ICU, but had regained consciousness the previous evening. Maria's condition was more complicated. The electrical current had caused cardiac arrhythmia, and she had struck her head when collapsing. She remained sedated in critical condition. Across town, Eleanor Winters sat in an orange jumpsuit in the county detention center's interview room. Her normally perfect hair hung limp around her face, her manicured nails now chipped and bare. Her attorney, Martin Sheffer, the most expensive criminal defense lawyer in the county, sat beside her, reviewing the charges that had been formally filed that morning. "Mrs. Winters, the prosecution has charged you with 2 counts of attempted murder in the first degree, 3 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, 1 count of criminal sabotage of public infrastructure, and multiple counts of reckless endangerment," Sheffer explained, his tone clinically detached. "The district attorney is treating this as a premeditated act with special circumstances due to the victims' ages." Eleanor stared at the metal table. "What does that mean?" "It means they're seeking maximum penalties. If convicted on all charges, you're looking at potentially 30 years to life." The reality of her situation seemed to finally penetrate Eleanor's state of shock. "But I didn't mean to hurt anyone, not seriously. I just wanted to scare them." Sheffer closed his leather portfolio with a snap. "The prosecution has recovered your internet search history, purchase records, and the modified electrical equipment. They'd also have statements from multiple neighbors about your documented hostility toward the apartment residents. The evidence of premeditation is substantial." "What about bail?" she asked, voice small. The judge denied bail at this morning's hearing, citing both flight risk and community safety concerns. For the first time, tears began to roll down Eleanor's cheeks. "Can I see Thomas?" Sheffer's expression remained professionally neutral. your husband has filed for emergency separation and a restraining order to distance himself from potential civil liability. He's also cooperating with the prosecution. The news hit Eleanor like a physical blow. In her mind, Thomas had always been the quiet supporter of her community standards crusade. She hadn't anticipated his abandonment. Meanwhile, the story had exploded beyond Sycamore Heights. National news vans lined the community entrance, reporters clamoring for interviews with residents. The case had touched a nerve in the national conversation about housing discrimination, class conflict, and the growing tensions in mixed-income developments. Walter Grimes had become an unlikely hero, his quick action credited with saving multiple lives. Standing outside the hospital with reporters, the retired electrician spoke with quiet dignity. "What I saw in that pump house wasn't an accident," he explained. "The modifications were deliberately designed to introduce electrical current into the water when activated remotely. In 40 years of electrical work, I've never seen something so recklessly dangerous." In the county prosecutor's office, District Attorney Vanessa Martinez reviewed the case file with her team. The evidence was overwhelming, not just of Eleanor's actions, but of a pattern of escalating behavior documented in HOA meeting minutes, emails, and witness statements. "We've recovered text messages where she specifically targeted the apartment children," Martinez's assistant noted, "and her internet search history shows she researched the effects of electrical current on the human body." Martinez nodded grimly. "This case goes beyond a neighborhood dispute. The defendant deliberately created a lethal trap activated while children were in the water. We're charging this as hate-motivated attempted murder." Back at the hospital, a doctor finally approached Samantha with an update. "Diego is showing remarkable improvement. Barring complications, we expect to move him out of ICU tomorrow. Maria's condition has stabilized, but she'll have a longer recovery ahead. The neurological tests are encouraging, but we're monitoring her closely for signs of lasting damage." Samantha sagged with relief. "Can I see Diego?" "Briefly. He's been asking for his mother, so it might help if you can explain things in a way he'll understand." The county courthouse steps were crowded with reporters 6 months later as the jury filed back into the courtroom after 3 days of deliberation. Inside, Eleanor Winters sat next to her attorney, her once immaculate appearance now a shadow of his former self. The designer clothes had been replaced by a conservative navy suit from a department store, a calculated attempt to appear relatable to the jury. Across the aisle, Maria Delgado sat with her right hand still slightly trembling, a lingering effect of the electrical shock. Beside her was Diego, fully recovered physically but still attending weekly therapy sessions to process the trauma. Samantha had come to support them, as she had throughout the grueling trial. District Attorney Vanessa Martinez had built a methodical case over the previous weeks, presenting evidence of Eleanor's internet searches, her modified electrical equipment, and the damning pattern of escalating harassment documented in her personal notebooks. The defense had attempted to portray Eleanor as a misguided community volunteer who made a terrible mistake without intending serious harm, but the evidence of premeditation was overwhelming. Judge Howard Stephens addressed the packed courtroom. Has the jury reached a verdict? The jury forewoman, a retired schoolteacher, stood. "We have, Your Honor." A hush fell over the courtroom as the clerk collected the verdict forms. Eleanor stared straight ahead, knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree of Diego Delgado, we find the defendant guilty." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree of Maria Delgado, we find the defendant guilty." Eleanor swayed slightly in her seat as the verdicts continued, guilty on all counts of assault with a deadly weapon, criminal sabotage, and reckless endangerment. The only mercy shown was the jury's finding that while the crimes were premeditated, they did not meet the legal threshold for hate crime enhancements under state law. Judge Stephens set sentencing for the following month and ordered Eleanor returned to custody. As officers approached to escort her from the courtroom, she finally turned toward Maria and Diego. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible above the courtroom commotion. "I never meant." But whatever she intended to say was cut short as she was led away, the heavy courtroom door closing behind her with a decisive thud. Outside, the case had catalyzed significant changes. The Sycamore Heights Homeowners Association had been completely restructured, with a new board that included equal representation from apartment residents. The pool area had been redesigned with enhanced safety features and security cameras, along with a memorial plaque honoring Walter Grimes' life-saving intervention. Walter himself had become an unlikely community bridge builder, starting a neighborhood watch program focused on inclusive community safety rather than exclusion. He'd also established a swimming safety program, providing free lessons to children from both the apartments and single-family homes. Thomas Winters had sold their home at a significant loss and relocated to another state, legally changing his name to distance himself from the case that had made national headlines. The divorce had been finalized 3 months after Eleanor's arrest. 1 month later, on a crisp autumn morning, Eleanor returned to the courtroom for sentencing. The intervening weeks had further diminished her, the confident bearing now replaced by a woman who seemed to have aged a decade and half a year. Maria had requested the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. She approached the